what sort of stories or developments would you like to have seen for your character Alan Carter in the show?
Well, I don't know if you're aware of how it all changed when Freddie Freiberger took over. He wasn't my favorite human being, and I wasn't his. So I don't know what form a third series would have taken. I don't think I would have done a third series with Freddie Freiberger, so maybe that wouldn't have been a problem. I always felt that it was a great shame we didn't develop more of the ancillary characters. It was very egocentric around the lead actors. I was very lucky that I happened to be one character that was working with both of them quite a lot, but it wasn't the same for everybody else. I believe that the success of television series is around ensemble. You know, it's great to have a wonderful, charismatic lead actor, even lead actress as well, or even a couple of them. But without an ensemble, the show is eventually going to fall apart. And I think Space 1999 days were numbered when they broke up the first ensemble and tried to pretend. I mean, Fred Freiberger said, when I asked him when I was brought in to talk about potentially coming back into the show, I said, doesn't it disturb you, Fred, that there was only 311 people on Moonbase Alpha, and you've just let about 12 of them go, and we suddenly have another 12 we've never seen before, you know? And he said, trust me, nobody will notice. So that was a really hard nut to swallow with that man. Wow. And you know, 50 years on, I've gotten over the fact that we're not going to have another Space 1999. I mean, if we do, it will be an entirely different show, as some of these remakes are. And the Star Trek remakes, or not remakes, but the new adventures of Star Trek have been hugely successful. I've been in 2 of them, which is quite a rare thing for an actor out of a science fiction series to go into another science fiction series playing a totally different character, and then go into another science fiction series playing again another totally different character, because I did Next Generation with Patrick Stewart, The Final Mission, the show that Will Wheaton left, and then I did Honor Among Thieves, playing Bilby in Deep Space Nine. Again, there's all kinds of stories about how you get into these shows and so forth. That's quite an interesting way that I got into that show. I don't know if you want to hear that one right now. Yes, okay. It was many years later, and I was working in Canada. I'd been asked to go up and shoot an episode of FX, which was a series made about the film that Brian Brown did. And it starred Cameron Dano, who was also an Australian actor, and they decided that he should have a dad. And so I came into the very last episode of FX up in Canada, playing his father, and it was one of the most wonderful characters I've ever had in my life, because he was a 70-year-old man going on 14 years of age. He was everybody's nightmare. Took no responsibility for anything, always wanted to be going off with the pretty girls, and giving his son, who was a serious investigative scientist, a big headache. It was a wonderful show for me to do, and I love working with Cameron. He's a great golfer, and I love golf. So I had a wonderful time there. And then when I finished it, they said, hey, Will, we love this character. That was the last episode of the first series of FX. We're going ahead with it next year. We want you to come in. Well, I was living in LA with my wife and kids, and it's always been the story of my wife's problem. Whenever I get a show, I move. Like I was doing Dolphin Cove in Queensland, Australia, for CBS Paramount. And when it looked like the show was going to end, Paramount sent a message that they really liked what I was doing, and would I come over to America and meet them. So I flew to America, and I thought our series, Dolphin Cove, would continue, but they said, it's not going to continue, Nick, but we'd like you to stay. And I said, but I can't stay. I'm an Australian. I don't have the permit to stay here. And they said, Nick, we're paramount. If we want you to stay, you will stay. And they fixed up my green card, and I stayed, and I made another television series that had nothing to do with Dolphin Cove. It was a thing called Open House on Fox. Fox in those days was only Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it was on a Sunday night, and it was sandwiched in between In Living Colour and Married with Children. So they were the two top shows on television, not just on Fox. They were both pulling 35s and 37s, which are huge numbers for television series to pull. We pulled like 18s and 19s, which you'd give your right arm for today. But back then, it looked like 37 for In Married with Children, and then down to 17 or 18 for Open House, and then back up to 35 for In Living Colour. So it looked like we were bombing, but we weren't bombing. The show was very popular in a limited kind of a way. It had wonderful actors in it: Mary Page Keller, Alison LaPlaca, Philip Charles Mackenzie, Danny Gantz, and Ellen DeGeneres playing her first on-camera non-stand-up role, played my secretary in that show. So I was very privileged to get that, and it got me a green card, but my wife remained in Australia. As the series was drawing to an end, she said, will you come home now? I said, will you please come to America and bring the kids? And I don't want to. I said, well, just come and have a holiday. So she came, and I put the hard word on her, and I said, look, I got to stay here. I earned more money just from the 22 episodes that I did on Open House than I've earned in my entire career in Australia. Because in Australia, you could be a star actor, and it's a bit hard to equate the money, but there was a period in Australia when I was earning $1,000 an episode in shows, and that was huge money for an Australian actor. That's back in the 50s and 60s in Australia, and in the early 70s. And then to come over here and get that kind of money every day was just a given. And I liked it. So I wanted to stay here, and I said to my wife, you have to stay. And she said, I'm going to take the kids back home. I said, Hazel, don't you understand? Everything we have, I mean, we might only have to spend 2 or 3 years here, but I really need you to stay. So my wife gave up everything that she loved about Australia, and now, our house still is on the northern beaches of Sydney. No. I'm sorry. I miss Australia terribly, and on the 7th of January this year, when everything around my house had flames 60 feet high in the Pacific Palisades, it was the most horrendous time of my life, because my daughter had a little baby and she was running from the flames and screaming at me, Dad, get out of the house. I didn't want to go. I've been in the Palisades for 30 years on and off, and I've lived through 5 major fires coming over from the Topanga Canyon from Malibu towards us. But this was a very different fire. There was wind like I've never seen before or since, thank God. I remember early in the morning, at 8:30 of that morning, it was a very, very warm morning, and I heard my house creaking, and I thought, oh, it's an earthquake. And then I realized there was this wind that was so strong that my house was moving. And I got up and I went and I looked out in the garden, and the trees were bending over, almost busting. And then I heard, and I looked around, and there's the gardener come in with his windblower. I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm going to do the garden. I said, what are you doing, huh? The leaves were just falling off the tree and spraying everybody. The garden. So anyway, he went away, and that was 8:30 in the morning. By 9:30 in the morning, I heard a lot of shouting going on outside, and I thought I'd better look outside. There were people in the street running up the road and pointing at the sky. I looked at the sky, and the sky was swirling grey and pink and brown clouds coming up from the highlands of the Palisades, and the hill was on fire. And by 10 o'clock, it was a major fire. and now the winds were so strong coming from the west through us that the sky, it looked like rockets were being fired through the air, but it was palm tree leaves that had broken off and they were flying through the air on fire. And they were landing 2 miles from it, setting fire to houses up here, and jumping all the houses in between, but they soon all got sprayed with the same stuff. And I didn't want to leave, I couldn't leave. I fortunately went and got my house deeds and family trust papers and everything, got out of the place by about 5:30 at night, by which stage all the roads were blocked. People were trying to overtake other people that wouldn't move, and it was just horrendous. They needed tractors in the end to push the cars off Sunset Boulevard so that people could get away. People got out of their cars and ran down to the beach. I fortunately managed to work away, as I generally do in my car, through all these people, and I got down to the road and I was gone by 6 o'clock at night. And I went to our friend's house in Santa Monica, and I was only there half an hour when all the sirens are going off in Santa Monica. We all were told to evacuate from there too. So I wound up going to Toluca Lake, and I just watched until 10 o'clock at night as all these sparks of fire were still coming towards us. It was terrifying. Okay, why did I digress into that? Let's talk about things we all love. Next question. Hello?
Do you still do voice work?
Do I still do voice work? Not much. I don't know why. I don't think I've retired, but I think my agent thinks I might have. I very stupidly left the best agent I've ever had in my life, Steve Disherman. In fact, he invited me to a thing about 3 weeks ago, which was a celebration of Steve Disherman's life. And he only invited about 3 voiceover actors, and I'm still his favorite. He doesn't work anymore, and neither do I. But it was just so wonderful to see Steve. He created my voiceover career. Well, he didn't actually create it. I was working in and around the film industry here, and I was invited to an Australian theatrical party. I don't generally go to Australian theatrical parties in LA because I was wanting to have an American career and just to live as an Australian actor in America isn't enough. You know, you've got to be able to do all the voices. So I didn't want to go to this party, but I wound up going anyway, and I met 2 guys who just stepped off the plane, and I swear to God, this is a true story. Russell Crowe and Hugh Jackman. The 2 of them were in their very early 30s, and they had become Australian film stars whilst I was over here working. I didn't know them at all. I'd never seen them, and people introduced them to me as if I should know them, and instead they went, "Oh, Nick Tate, I said, "I'm sorry, how do you know me?" He said, "I grew up knowing you, mate. Of course I knew. Hugh, this is Nick Tate." Oh, and Hugh was wonderful. And I didn't realize that I was meeting these 2 guys that were going to be superstars. So at that party, there was a little blonde girl running around all over the place, and she came over to me and she said, very pretty, and she said, "Oh, I know you. I used to watch you on TV as I was growing up." And she said, "What are you doing here now?" And I said, "Well, I work as an actor here." "Oh, yeah, I haven't seen you." I said, "Yeah, well, what are you doing here?" She said, "Oh, I work on the news broadcasts. I'm a stringer for the, I stand up on the hill." She said, "I was up there for," she talked about the fires that had happened before in Malibu. And she said, "I was, up there with the flames licking around me, and I'm doing the stringer work." And I said, "And what do you do about the accent?" She said, "What accent?" I said, "Well, you've got a bit of an Aussie accent." She said, "Oh, my husband doesn't think I do." So I look, and there's this guy over there. He's just looking at me like that. So I excused myself and I walked away. And he walks over to me and he says, "So what did you think of the bride?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Come on, I saw you chatting her up over there. What did you think of her?" I said, "Why?" because she's my wife, that's why. And I'm saying, oh, great for you, buddy. You know, and he says, hey, I'm just putting you on, pal. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm at a party with you here, you know. No, I mean, as a career. He said, you know, you're a great voiceover guy. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't do voiceovers. Yes, you do. You did a voiceover for me at Channel 7 2 years ago in Sydney. Channel 9 it was. And his name was Vincent Sklanner. And he was one of the top voiceover producers in Hollywood. And he was at this party, and he recognized me from, I don't know, I apparently worked for him in Sydney. I didn't know that. He'd gone over there for some big job, and I was the voice on it. And he said, you should be doing movie trailers here. And I said, well, yeah, we'll tell my agent. He said, who's your agent? I said, Don Pitts. He said, well, Jesus, with a name like that, is it any wonder you're not doing voiceovers? I said, here, look, here's my card. He said, you call me, I'm going to use you. I said, doing what? He said, I do movie trailers. I told you, you know. And I said, well, yeah, thank you very much. Now, don't you forget you called me. I didn't call him. I didn't call him. About 3 weeks later, it's a Sunday, I'm having breakfast with my wife. We were doing okay. I was doing guest roles in Star Trek and Jag and Murder, She Wrote and all kinds of things. You know, I was having a good time. This is 91, 92. I probably did 4 or 5 guest shots on nice television series a year, and that's not a huge amount of money. That's only about $6,000 to $7,000 a time. So you do 5 of those, that's what's that, $35,000? That's not going to keep a man with 2 kids alive in LA. So I was thinking of going back to Australia. And the phone rings on Sunday morning, and my wife's going, who is it? I'm sorry, she said, there's a man with a very funny voice on the phone. He's asking for you. I said, well, let me talk with him. I said, hello. So what are you doing? Are you working? I said, no, I'm not working. I said, who is this? He said, come on, you know who this is. I met you 3 weeks ago. Why didn't you call me? And I said, because I thought you were full of shit, you know. And he said, I ain't full of shit, man. He said, how's $300 sound here? Now, in 1992, $300 for a few minutes work sounded really nice to me. So I said, when? And he says, what about now? I said, it's Sunday. He said, what are you, religious or something? I'm going to give you $300 cash in your hand. Come on over. He lived above Universal Studios up on a hill. And I drove to his house. And as I parked my car on the hill, I looked over at the other side. Universal Studios is up there, if you probably know what I'm talking about. Up on this hill. You can see everything down there, and his house was just back from that chicken wire fence, not chicken wire, what do they call it? Hurricane wire. Anyway, I go into the house, and he's got, the first room you come to is a studio with all these monitors and things and microphones and just extraordinary stuff. And he was working on a movie trailer that he wanted the most famous American voiceover man in the world, Don LaFontaine, to do. And he said, I work with Don all the time, but you know, I gotta do what's called subbing first. So I want you to sound like Don. And I said, well, if I sounded like Don, man, I wouldn't stop working. And he said, yeah, but I love what you do anyway, so just be you doing it, but think of what Don would do. And so I said, well, how do you do this? He said, I had my own Don. He said, I had a guy who was a really great guy, and he would sub for me all the time, but he drank himself to death, and he died about 6 weeks ago. And he said, I can't get anybody else to sub for me. That's why I'm going to give you $300. So I did this thing for him. It was called Whispers in the Dark. And we got it. And he started sending me into studios with him. And then he put on his director's cap, and he was very hard to work for, because even though he loved me and he said to me, you're going to make $1 million doing voiceovers, he drove me like a jockey on a horse with a big whip. And he got it out of me, and we went on, and then finally the show was going to go to air, and they took me off it, and they put Dawn on. And he said, anyway, he was giving me $300 every time I went into work for him. So I was quite pleased. And then he said to me, you know what I'm going to do? He said, so that they don't take you off and put Don on, because they do that all the time. Everybody else subs to Don because he never stops working. And he said, but I've got a big movie that I did with Don about 2 years ago. He said, I'm going to take his voice off. I'm going to revoice it with you. He said, then I'm going to take a few people out to lunch and I'm going to play this. So he invited me to the Jonathan Club in Hollywood. And I went down and I had lunch with Steve Disherman and two of the top voiceover agents in William Morris and CAA. I can't remember their names. But anyway, I didn't, he said, just shut up, don't talk. He said, I'll do all the talking. And he said, so he puts this speaker on the table. He said, I got a conundrum for all of you guys. Who is this? And he plays the reel that I did, the promo that they took Don's voice off. And I guess I sounded a bit like Don. And so the two other agents look at Steve and they said, is that Don? Because he was Don LaFontane's agent. And he said, no, it's not Don, but I don't know who it is. And the other two go, okay, who is it? He said, this guy. Because I was just, shut up, I didn't talk to anybody, And he says, so who wants it? I felt like a whore. Who wants it? The three top voiceover agents in America are sitting there with me. Tishman said, do you play golf? And I said, yeah, I do. He said, I just lost my fourth for Sunday. He said, you want to come and play golf with us? I said, yeah, I would. I'd love that. Thank you. So that was Tishman. The other two didn't say anything. They said, thank you very much, and they left. We'll think about it. Off they went. On Sunday, I went to play golf with Steve. Got on like a house on fire with this man. He was a lovely man. Still is, still alive. And on the 17th green, as the other two guys had finished putting, he says, go and hit off. He said, Nick and I are going to finish this putt right here. And I'm thinking, what's that about? So they walk off, and then he's standing over the putt for quite a long while. And I think, when is he going to putt it? And he looks up at me and he said, so I listened to your reel again. Do you want to come in and sign papers tomorrow? You don't know what that means? No. I have made a fortune doing voiceovers. And it's enabled me to stay in this country. And at that moment, that's when that happened. There are things in life, and you try to say, when did that door close and this door open? That's when that door opened.
What year was that? What year was that, Alan?
Well, that must have been very early in 91 or 2, because I became the voice of Jurassic Park, which was in 1992. But the first voiceover that I did for him was, I did Whispers in the Dark, which he had Dawn on. But then I did a thing called Shattered. A thriller-minute thriller full of twists and turns, dangerous curves. Yeah, that was with Barbara Hershey. She was the dangerous curves. It was a good film, but it was my first voiceover ever. Then I did Free Willy. Then I did Searching for Bobby Fischer. And then I did, I think the film that really got me going was, I was asked to go down and revoice something that another voiceover actor had done. It was called 1492, Gerard Depardieu.
Oh, yeah.
And Ridley Scott's movie. And there's a big voiceover agency called Kaleidoscope. And they were doing this, and Steve says to me, don't say anything, just walk in and do it. One of my guys is doing it, and they don't like him. And they've listened to our house reel, they've heard your voice, they think you can do it. Just go in and do it, and don't say anything. So I go to Kaleidoscope, and it was the biggest voiceover studio in LA, and therefore probably in the world because of that. They did all the big shows. They're still around, but not in the same way. And I walk in, and I know that he said, don't talk because I've got an Australian accent, But when I work, I don't. And so I walk in and it was a room about half the size of this with a big screen and big speakers either side of it. And he said, look, I don't know what Steve's told you, but the problem is this guy doesn't sound enough like, I wanted to sound like Christopher Plummer. Christopher Plummer's in the film. He said, you know Christopher Plummer? And I went, uh-huh. And he said, so can you do Christopher Plummer? And I said, uh-huh. Not joking. Okay, well, we're going to play it for you. So they put it on, and these speakers, Vangelis music. Anybody see 1492?
Yeah.
What the most spectacular film. The visuals, the waterfalls, the murders, the jungle, the thrilling, exciting. I was having an orgasm listening to this. And I thought the guy doing the voiceover was fabulous. I really did. He's not good to the plumber, but he was really good. And when it finished, he turns the lights back on again, and I'm there, and he says, what do you think? And I said, uh-huh. And he said, do you see the problem? And I said, yeah. He said, you do? I do. You do? Go and make yourself famous. So he looks up at the control room. He says, he's coming up. He said, go up the stairs up there. He said, come on, look. I'm running out of time here. Just get up and do it for me. So I go up to the room, and I said to the guy, I'm not in a control room, incidentally. I'm in the room where he does, well, that's the control room. It's not a sound room. So I said to the guy, can you play it for me again? And he said, come on, let's turn it, let's do this. And he says he wants to hear it again. Oh, Jesus, you've heard it once. What, you want to hear it again? I said, okay, play it for him again. So he played it for me again. I make little hieroglyphics on my script where I need to up and down and little pauses and so forth. So then I said, do it again. He wants to hear it again, and he says, oh, Christ, I think he's going to walk out of the room. I think maybe I've stretched this too far, but he plays it for me again, and then I launched straight into it. I did it one time, and he turns around, the lights come on, and he points up and he says, start putting a new room on your house. And he walks out, and that was my beginning. I did 1492 and Conquest of Paradise, and it was huge. Everybody in the industry saw it. And that's what's important. Doesn't matter what the audience thinks about it. It's the people in the industry. I started getting bookings all over the place. The next big booking I got was a man called Steven Spielberg, who was shooting a thing called Jurassic Park. And it was just a natural for him. He said, I want that guy. He didn't want Don LaFontaine. He didn't want Peter Cullen. He didn't want all the Danny Brooks. He didn't want all these other very well-known classic voiceover guys. He wanted somebody new and different. And that was me, thank God. And Tishman used to say to me, Nick, you got to stop whispering, you don't cut through like all the other guys. And that became my virtue, that I didn't cut through like all the other guys. I was the guy that came from underneath. Mm-hmm. The mysterious voice. Conquest of Paradise. Yes, sir.
I have a question. So, how many times do you think you said the words "in a world"?
Well, I gotta give it to Don LaFontaine. That was his "In a World," but I went on to say "In a World" many times myself. And the funny part about it was that Don was with Steve Tishman, and every time I would come into the agency, because I was there for about 4 months before I actually hit. I was doing voiceovers, but I wasn't getting anything. I'd lost Whispers in the Dark, as I told you, and to Dawn. I did get Shattered, and then I was doing some prelim work on Free Willy, and they weren't sure whether they were going to use me or not. Everybody's very scared to take on a new voice because all the other voices are so tried and proven, and that's what gets a movie made. If Don LaFontaine is on it, it's going to get made. He used to make $7 million a year. I never made $1 million a year, but I got really, really close. So he was so far ahead of everybody else, But I had a career of 10 years doing voiceovers, and thank you, it was very, very nice. So much so that I stopped working as an actor. I was doing auditions throughout the day, in the beginning. And then Tishman said to me, where are you going all the time? I've got about 5 voiceovers lined up for you. You keep on going off, and what's she doing? I said, well, I'm on camera, you know. And then I got an episode of Star Trek. That was the Next Generation that I got. And he said, are you crazy? How many days are you doing on Star Trek? I said, it's 8 days. He said, Jesus, Nick, you're doing 5 voiceovers a day. 8 5s is 40. He said, that's 40 voiceovers you're not going to do for me. You got to make up your mind. You got to be a voiceover actor. You got to be an on-camera actor, you know, because it can't be both. It just can't.
Wow.
And I didn't do it voluntarily, but I recognized that I was losing some of the clients that I had. Kaleidoscope, who loved me, suddenly went, you're never available. You know, what are you doing? I even took a holiday. I went to the south of France with my wife. No, it was Positano in Italy. I mean, we did a lot of traveling. But Positano, I don't know if you know, it's a long way from Naples, and it's around the twisty Amalfi coastline. And when you park your car in the hotel in Positano, it's not down in the hotel, it's on the roof of one of the, because it's a cliff like this, and all the hotels are up there, and you can't take your car down. So you wind up parking your car in hotels on the top. And then they have all these racks. You put your car on that, and it goes on top of another car. Another car on top of that. My car was 3 cars above these other cars. At 8 o'clock in the morning, my agent and Tishman rings me. He says, quick, get into Naples. He said, you got to 10 o'clock in the morning to do it. It's 8 o'clock. I got 2 hours. I can do it. So I'll be there. So I ran up the hill, and I called out on the phone in the hotel I was in, get my car for me. By the time I get there, they haven't even got it off the rack. It's up 3 cars, and I'm saying, please get the car. And you know, an hour later they get my car, and then I'm driving around the Amalfi coastline, and I'm trying to get past this woman who just, she's smoking in a car, and she just keeps on giving me the finger, you know. Honk. And then eventually I got past this woman, and she tooted at me. She had blue hair, and she was about 60, 70 years of age. And eventually I come screeching into Naples, and I stopped because I didn't know where I was, and I had to make a phone call to find a studio. And I rang Tishman instantly in America, and he says, turn around, Nick, you just lost the job. Not only have you lost this job, Kaleidoscope are really pissed with you that you've gone to Italy. I made a terrible mistake. I was on Toy Story, I was on about 5 movies at that time. They dropped me from all of them. And I was not working as an actor anymore, because for the last 5 years, all I was doing was voiceovers. I was making a lot of money. I built a beautiful house in the Palisades, which is now toxic because of all the smoke and crap that's around it. But look, I've been very lucky. I've had a wonderful life and a wonderful career, and I got fabulous kids and wonderful grandchildren. But you know, I'm 83 years of age, and I've still got a life. There's plenty of punch in me, and I want to do things. I went back to Australia a couple of years ago, and I did a wonderful play there, playing a character not unlike Donald Trump. Sorry, I had this reaction. This is a story about a man like Rupert Murdoch and Donald. Anyway, and it's a great play. It's called When Dad Married Fury. And the only reason I did it was because I think they should make a film about it. And I'm probably too old to play it now, because I was about 75 when I did it. And it's a brilliant story. It's the story about the crash of 2008, financial crash. And my character is a financier who has got lots of clients, and he's embezzling and getting money from all of them. And there are people in 2008 that started jumping from tall buildings because they were so destroyed by their financial advisors. So my character runs away from America and goes back to Australia to live, because he's managed to grab a lot of the money that these clients have jumped out of windows. And David Williamson wrote it, and it's a wonderful play. It's very darkly funny, and his family, who are waiting to see him in Australia, haven't seen him for years, because he's been spending all his money over in America and everybody else's money, and he's coming home now, so they're hoping that they're going to get between the two sons waiting at the airport and their wives. One wife hates him because her father had invested in his company and her father jumped out of a tall building. So there's always drama in good comedy. And anyway, when he gets off the plane, they think that being his only sons, everything's going to be great. But he steps off the plane with a girl who is like 30 years of age and very pregnant with twins. So they're not going to be just the only two sons. And so now, straight off, they hate her because they think that she only screwed him because he's a 70-year-old man and she's only 30 years of age. Incidentally, she was a wonderful actress that played the role. I had some fabulous scenes with her. And it turns out that she actually is very, very smart herself. And she's made a lot of money and she's a millionaire in her own right. And the reason she marries him is because she knows that he's not going to be trying to take her money from her. It's a very convoluted story. I would love to make it as a film, but they'll probably give it to Sam Neill because he gets all the good Aussie roles. And he's a wonderful actor. Let's have another question, please. Yes?
Before you're off topic, what was it like to work flying an eagle and work with the special effects people? And did you get to keep any props at all?
I didn't keep any props. I'm one of those actors that just walks away from the show. It's like, a marriage. When it's all over, it's all over. You can have everything. I'm done with this.
That would be my dream, to sit in the cockpit of the eagle.
I can't hear you.
That would be my dream, to sit in the cockpit of the eagle.
It was your dream to sit in the cockpit? Yeah, well, it was an...
I imagine I was you flying it around.
Look, I was a young Aussie actor that had come over here. I'd worked well in Australia, and I'd worked well in England. I had some excellent work behind me.
Along with the special effects people.
Yeah, and I was just so excited by the show. I was offered about 5 jobs when I came to England at the time. The reason being was I'd done a television series in Australia for Bruce Gingell, who was captured by Sir Lou Grade in England and taken over to run his empire. So Bruce Gingell was already a man I'd worked for. And when I arrived in England, he heard that I was there and he called me up and said, "Hey Nick, I've got a lot of shows that I'm doing and I would love for you to be in them." It's amazing in life how sometimes people just reach out and give you the golden handshake, or the beginning of what's potentially that. And I was given about 5 different jobs that I had to try and decide, and I was going to let somebody down. One was called Crossroads, which was about soccer in Manchester. I went on a train up to Manchester. I met the producers. They started writing for me. So I came back to London at the time in preparation for auditioning for other things at the same time, because that was going to be a few months away. I auditioned for a play called Streetcar Named Desire, playing Stanley Kowalski, which was the role that made Marlon Brando famous. And I knew they were very interested in me and to play the role. And then he said, "I want you to go out to the Pinewood Studios and meet with the Andersons." Sylvia Anderson was Lady Penelope in the Thunderbirds, and my dad was one of the men in voiceovers in Thunderbirds with Sylvia, so she knew my dad. And he said to me, "There's all kinds of roles in this show. It's a show called Space 1999 about outer space," and he said, "You'd be a great astronaut, so I want you to meet me." So I went down to Pinewood Studios, and I had to go through the casting director first, a man called Michael Barnes. And he said to me, "I understand you want to see Sylvia." And I said, yeah, she's said I could come and meet her at 10 o'clock. "Yes, well, I'm afraid that's not going to be possible because she's very busy. And anyway, the whole show's cast. I can see that you would have been very useful in the show, but unfortunately, there's nothing for you. So I'm sorry." And it's virtually pushing me out the door, and I've gone, but I need to see Sylvia because Bruce Gingell, who Michael Barnes did not know anything about Bruce Gingell, because Bruce was new. He'd only been with Sir Lou Grade for a couple of weeks, and he was trying to just engender a whole new kind of animal in what Lou Grade was doing. So I knew that I had to get to see Sylvia, but Michael Barnes was saying, no, this is not going to happen. You know, it's all cast, Nick, so forget it. So I'm walking down and I'm seeing all the people walking around because they were already in all the Space 1999 gear like you are. And it was very exciting. It was a thrilling atmosphere that was happening there. They were workshopping Space 1999, which is very rare. Usually movies, you go in and you may get a table read. You might even do something over the weekend where they put all the actors together and talk about what they hope they're going to be doing together. But this, Lee Katzman, the director, was actually workshopping the show. He was bringing up scenarios that may or may not be going to take place in various episodes. And he wanted to see how the actors all bounced off each other. So I was very excited by this, and Sylvia took me in and showed me it all. But before that, as I was being shown out by Michael Barnes, I walked past Gerry Anderson's door, and then I walked past Sylvia Anderson's door, and the door was open ajar, and there's this very beautiful woman sitting in there with her red hair, pinkish hair actually, and she was on the phone, and I looked at her, and she was gorgeous. And I stopped, and I smiled, and she went, hello? And I said, Sylvia? She said, yes. I said, I'm Johnny Tate's son. She said, Johnny Tate's son. And Michael Barnes went, sorry, Sylvia, sorry. No, he's just going. There's nothing in the show, Sylvia. And she goes, it's all right, Michael. Come in. What's your name? I said, I'm Nick Tate. She said, oh, sit down. And Michael goes, I'm sorry, Sylvia. There's nothing in the show for him. We're all cast. And she said, just thank you, Michael. And send him away. She sat talking to me for half an hour. She was a lovely woman. She played Lady Penelope in the show, and she loved my dad. My dad was a very naughty, I mean, a bit like me. Is anybody naughtier than I am? I don't know, but anyway, he was. And he drank. He was an alcoholic, my dad. So I was having some pretty tough times with him, and had done. I didn't want to talk with him for ages. But he did ask me to come to England, and he was trying to make amends, and so I was there. And so Sylvia says, Michael's right, Nick, there is nothing in the show. It's all cast. But I have an idea, if you would like it, you could play one of the pilots that unfortunately gets blown up at the end of the episode. And I'm going, sounds interesting. She said, well, let me show you. So she then took me around, and we went and visited all the sets and looked at Martin and Barbara all rehearsing and doing this stuff. And everybody was in their uniforms. And I just got this buzz. I thought, I gotta do this. Now I was offered to do Crossroads up in Manchester. They were even writing for me. I get back in to tell my agent, and he says, before we do it, say anything, Nick, you got Stanley Kowalski. You're going to be in Streetcar Named Desire, man. I'm just so thrilled for you, because this is what I need for you. Britain is based on theatre. He said, you do this in the theatre in London, your name is going to be right up there with the best of them. And that's what made Marlon Brando. And I said, but I've just been talking to the Andersons about space. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, Bruce Gingell, because he hadn't really organized this. Bruce Gingell had done it all. And he said, I couldn't advise you more strongly not to do this, Nick. He said, that's American television. It's not going to work here in England. Well, you know what? He was right about that. Space 1999 was never embraced by the British. It was made there at Pinewood Studios. We had some wonderful actors in the show, but it wasn't English. It was an American implant, and a lot of Americans say, well, but it sounded very English to us. That's why a lot of Americans didn't really like it, because it didn't have that American sensibility, as much as Martin tried to make it that way. I was very lucky that Martin spotted me early on when I was auditioning with everybody, when I was workshopping everything. He came to me one time, he said, hey, Ozzy, he said, you have a very different way of working the camera from these other English actors. He said, you're like us. You worked a lot on camera? And I said, yeah, I've done a couple of television series in Australia, all shot on film. He said, yeah, it shows. And he patted me on the shoulders, and I thought, Martin Landau likes me, you know? That was great. I think it's the reason I got the show, because suddenly the Italian actor that was going to be playing the chief astronaut still hadn't arrived, and he was due to arrive at the end of the week because we were going to start shooting the following week. But he was very tall, very good looking, chocolate box actor, and suddenly he wasn't available anymore. Martin was more powerful than even I knew, but this man was not going to be in his show. And he kind of liked this funny little Australian actor that was there, and maybe he'd be a good, shame the Italian's not coming. Anyway, what about this Nick Tate guy? So they brought me in for an audition, and they tried to get me to do it Italian, because the role was written for an Italian. And everybody said, but he's blonde. And I said, well, John Paul Belmondo's blonde. And everybody, yeah, John Paul Belmondo, he's blonde, yeah, we could do this. So I did a very bad Italian accent, I have to be quite honest. So then they said, well, Lee says to them, because this was an audition, there were all these actors that had come to audition. We're about to start in about 5 days' time. So he says, look, it's an international moon base, for Christ's sake. He could be, look, he looks German, right? Let's try German. So I said, I don't know, can you do German, Nick? And I said, jawohl. So I said, we will ask the questions, and I'm doing my German, and we're going, yes, thank you very much, Nick. No, this is, look, it's all right, darling. We love you, Nick. You're going to die in the first episode. And he goes, no, wait a minute. Look, it's an international moon base, for Christ's sake. Okay, not Italian, not German. How about he plays it Australian? And she says, there's no bloody Australians on the moon, Lee. And I said, there's no bloody English on the moon either. So. And he said, you see that? That's the guy. That's the guy. He answers back. Sylvia, give it a break. Let's try it Australian. So I did it Australian. And she goes, get out of here. And I went, oh, all right. So I leave, and I get home, my phone rings, my agent said, what did you do? I said, what do you mean? He said, you accepted a role in Space 1999? I said, I told you, I know it's going to be big. He said, Nick, Streetcar Named Desire, I want you now. And he said, and I've just had a call from the Andersons, they're offering you to play the chief astronaut in Space 1999. What have you done? And I said, I don't know, but it sounds pretty good to me. And that's how it happened. And I stayed. And they only gave me the first episode. I was on trial for the first episode, second episode, third episode. By the fifth episode, they said, right, you're in. I was playing the same character. You know, I was Alan Carter.
Yeah.
He was going to be Alphonse Catani. But then Johnny Byrne and the others took me to their house on the weekend. We talked about a potential Australian life for what the guy would be like. And we decided that he would have been born on a cattle station in Australia, which also ran sheep. And they needed crop dusting, so I became the pilot for the crop, and the pilots taught me how to be a flyer. I took to it so greatly that all I wanted to do was go and join the Australian Air Force. My microphone's going in and out. Fortunately, I'm theatrically trained. Can you hear me in the back? Yes, we can. I don't need a microphone, right? So, we developed Alan Carter's character, and they started writing for me. And then I realized it was a bit of a mistake to be too Australian, because in those days, no Australian actors were working anywhere in the world. Crocodile Dundee hadn't happened yet, and the only Australian actor that anybody ever remembered from the old days was a man called Chips Rafferty. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember Chips Rafferty, but he was the big iconic 6'7" Australian actor that did everything in Australia. Jack Thompson has become very famous in Australia as an actor, but he sadly couldn't ever do an American accent or an English accent for that matter. Jack is iconically Australian and a wonderful actor, but that's limiting. You know, if you want to work in this world of acting, you've got to be able to do different voices, different accents, and so forth. So it's always been something that I like to do. I don't know that I always pull it off well. I did Blacklist a couple of years ago where I played an Irish drug squad, head of the Irish drug squad. Anybody see that, Blacklist?
Yeah.
About 5 hands went up. Oh,
Yeah.
6, 7, 8. You're not sure, right?
No, I'd have to see the episode.
Yeah. No, it was a great episode.
But you're such a great actor, you just morph into your role and then try to visualize you. And unfortunately, Carter keeps coming up for some reason.
I don't mind him coming up. He's been my great joy in life. It is one of the greatest roles that anybody could ever be offered, to be playing such a scallywag, and for them to keep on wanting me to reinvent Alan Carter. Martin sometimes was very happy with that and sometimes wasn't. I had a couple of episodes taken away from me because he didn't want me to do them. He was my best friend and my toughest I'm going to say comrade de league. I was never in bed with him, but Martin was like working with a big dog that you love and you play and have a wonderful time with him, and then he gets a bone and you touch his bone and you bite your fucking head off. I'm sorry I said head in front of all of you. I loved Martin Landau. It was very hard working with this man who, what he said went in this show. Nobody could do anything in this show that Martin didn't want to happen. So I'm lucky that he liked me, because if he didn't like somebody, they didn't last. And I always liken it to, and he did with me, to a tennis match. You know, you're only as good as your opponent will allow you to be. And there's no point in somebody destroying somebody else on a tennis field, tennis court. It happens all the time. But the best matches are when two players are so incredibly equal. I went to see the final match that McEnroe played with Bjorn Borg at Wimbledon. And I watched the two of them. They had 5 years in a row. They went to 5 sets every year, and Borg won every year until the 5th year, and McEnroe finally beat him. It was orgasmic. And that's the difference when you see sheer genius of these people being able to challenge each other so incredibly and hit back balls that nobody else on the planet could ever get back. And we're seeing it even today with these wonderful tennis players. And I liken acting to that when you have a great scene going on, it's wonderful to see somebody deliver a line that the next guy comes back with a better line or a better reaction sometimes. Sometimes you don't actually have to speak. It's those moments in between the words that make the difference. And so when I'm sometimes helping young actors, and they say, you know, how do we make this different? I say, well, every time you go in for an audition and they're seeing 50 actors, you're all saying the same words. So how are you going to make it different? It's the pieces in between the words that are yours. The pauses, the reactions, they're yours. They're not written. They might be written, but you can change them. You can't change the words because writers get really pissed with you if you do. But you can change the rhythms, you can change the intonations, and that's the art of being a good actor, is being a reactor. It's how you react to the other person's lines, which creates the way you launch your next moment. If you work with somebody like Charlie Crichton, he wants to dictate those moments as a director, but even he then finally realizes that if he trusts you enough, he'll let you go. I remember that when I was doing voiceovers, I used to go in and do voices before I got 1492. All the producers that I worked with would direct me every single intonation. It was just so infuriating and frustrating that these people thought they knew better than I did. They were directors and they didn't trust me as a voiceover guy. But when I got 1492, suddenly everybody went, oh my God,
have you heard what Nick is doing? You know, and they bring me in. And I remember the worst guy that used to drive me crazy at Flagstaff. He would take me through every intonation. So he books me about a week after 1492 has started, and I'm thinking, I'm dreading going back to him. He's going to direct the hell out of me again. I walk in and he says, Nick, he said, my God, I knew you were going to break. He said, this is amazing. Everybody's talking about you. Everybody, and he had a whole host of people there. They're all sitting behind the window, all drinking their champagne. They don't care when the directors are directing. They're there with their strawberries and their champagne, and you're all alone with maybe a bottle of water if you're lucky, doing the voiceover. Well, they don't want me to get pissed, but they are all having a party, you know, more often than not when you're working. And this time he just said, do your thing, Nick. And I said, really? He said, yeah, of course. Jurassic Park, do your thing, Nick, you know. So I did my thing, and he said, God bless you, gave me a kiss through the air. And he never, again, ever told me how to say the words.
He had respect for you.
He just suddenly flipped. Suddenly he felt safe, you know. Sometimes I wanted him to tell me what he wanted, you know. If you can't get it yourself. But the day that I did the 1492 audition, which I told you about, standing up in that booth and asking them to play it again, I was listening to what the other man had been doing, as wonderful as he was, and making it my own with my little hieroglyphics. And when you do it and you're standing in the microphone, you start getting, I do at least, a frisson of this chill that's going up. You can hear it, and it's like, it's awful to say, but it's like you just think this is wonderful. I guess it's kind of like singing in an opera with an orchestra. You know, and I've done that too. When I was young, I was Amal in Menotti's Amal on the Night Visitors for the Sydney Opera Company. I'm not an opera singer, but I was a very good voice soprano. And to be buoyed up by an orchestra is just staggering. And you get that sense of, the only thing I can liken it to is those few moments in bed before the great cataclysm happens. That sometimes happens doing voiceovers. You have to be careful not to scream when you finish the voiceover. Next question. No more questions, this is great. Oh, hello.
What was it like working with Barry Morse and Prentice and Xenia in like the last?
I loved Xenia. She was a doll. Nothing ever happened. She just like my sister, but she was such an empathetic performer and an empathetic actress in the room with you too. Always gorgeous. Prentice was a very reserved kind of a guy. Good actor. Didn't get the opportunities that they allowed Tony and Holt. Martin didn't want it from people, you know. He wanted the moments. And I was lucky that when I was in a spaceship with him, he had to have somebody to knock that ball back, you know, and that was me. I was really lucky for that. But I wish that I'd had more to do with Prentice. I don't think we ever had really anything to do together. Xenia and I, little bits.
The Last Sunset, when you guys were.
Oh, The Last Sunset.
With the bread that got you drunk, I guess.
Yeah, you know, it's funny you sit there and tell me about shows. I don't remember them. It's 50 years ago, man. And I don't watch them. It's not that I wouldn't. It's kind of like revisiting an old relationship, you know? I can't keep crying about something that I adored at the time. I loved every minute of working on that show, but it's gone, you know? And it's in your memory, not mine. At least those moments.
Does it all blend together as one experience?
Sometimes, yeah. The 2 years were very different, you understand. Very different. I actually walked away from the show that was so different. Even though I was given it, I said to Fry when he first put me into the show, I think I've told this story to people. I went and sat with him because Gerry said, you know, he's going to be your producer. Talk to him about your character. So I'm asking him what he thinks he's going to do for me that's different. He said, "What do you mean different?" And I said, "Well, you said to me when I first met you that my character wasn't very human, and you wanted to humanize me." He said, "I didn't say you weren't human. I said I wanted to humanize you." I said, "Yeah. So what are you going to do for me that's different?" Because other people have a different opinion. You know, I've been told by many a fan how human they think I am. And here you're saying I'm not and that I'm wooden. He said, "No, I didn't really mean it like that." He said, and I know my kids, see, the reason I in fact want you in the show now is because my kids love you. And that's why I want you back. And I'm thinking, this man is such a bullshit artist. So I said, "How are you going to make me different?" He said, "Well, for a start, I'm going to promote you. I'm going to make you Lieutenant Carter." And I said, "You're going to make me Lieutenant Carter?" "Yeah." I said, "Fred, have you ever seen this show?" He said, what are you talking about?" I said, "From day one, I was Captain Alan Carter." "What do you mean?" I said, "Exactly, Fred. Have you seen this show?" "Well, yeah, but you're Captain. I think I'm having a crazy moment here." "Okay, yeah, sure. Forget it, you know." He was such a bullshit artist. I knew exactly who he was, what kind of animal he was from day one. And I walked out of the show after about 5 episodes because when I came into the second series, they didn't give me the whole series. They wanted to, because when Gerry brought me back and said, "Well, Nick, you've won, we're going to bring you back in the show," I said, "Well, do I have anything to say about that? Gerry, why would I want to come back if this man doesn't want me?" He said, "Because he's going to write for you. So, you know, I want him to come in and you can sit down and talk with him." And so he asked me to go to his house. I went to his house. That's where he told me he was going to promote me to lieutenant. What a prick.
But you ended up doing more. So
Oh yeah, but
you left the show and then
after about 5 episodes, there was a scene because he said he was going to write for me. It would be meaningful. I got got the script and I went through it, and I had one line. "Will do, Commander," I said. And did you see my little doll out there on a moon buggy? That's the only time you saw Alan Carter in the entire episode. I walked into his office. I dropped the script on his desk, and I said, "Fred, is this what you mean about meaningful writing?" He said, "What are you talking about?" "Will do, Commander. And it's being done by a puppet. You can stick this show up your ass, Fred." And I walked out. He said, "You can't walk out on me. You'll never work in Hollywood again." I said, "This isn't Hollywood. You're in England, you idiot." I swear to God. And Martin came out. He was screaming at me down the corridor. You never work here again. You know, don't walk out. You can't walk out on me." You said, "You watch me as I'm going," you know. And I walked out. I went to my car, got in my car. Martin comes running out of the building. Nicky, what are you doing? What are you doing, Martin? Don't do this. He's too powerful." I said, "Martin, do you really care?" And he said, "What do you mean? Of course I care." There's a whole other story, but Dragon's Domain was written for me, and Martin didn't want me to do it. I didn't know why at the time. I learned about it much, much later, and I had to live with that for all the rest of the series, never once calling Martin on it, because I knew it was too dangerous. He pretended he loved me, I pretended I loved him. In fact, I did love him. I mean, he was too good not to love, you know? Working with a genius. I just don't think
he was threatened by you.
You know, he thought I was a kid. I am a kid. I was a kid. I still am a kid. I've always been a kid. I don't want to be a big grown-up guy, you know? I want to have fun. And I want to love my fellow performers like they're my best friends. And I loved him.
Dragon's Domain, what would, I'm trying to remember, would you have been that actor?
Yeah, they had to bring in an Italian actor and kill him because Martin was going to kill the dragon, not Alan Carter was going to kill the dragon. But Johnny Byrne gave me the script 5 weeks earlier and I read it. And I was so thrilled that I was going to be playing this role. And then when the script came out, I get knocked on the head in the first scene and I'm not in the episode. They bring in an Italian. Where's he come from? The bowels of the earth of the moon, you know? Bowels of the moon. And I went to Sylvia and I said to her, "Sylvia, can I speak with you?" And she said, yes, darling, what is it? And I closed the door. She said, what are you doing? And I said, I've read this script before, and Alan Carter kills the dragon, not Martin. And she says, hang on a minute. She goes and gets a bottle of scotch, and she pours 2 stiff whiskeys. This is 10 o'clock in the morning. She goes over and makes sure the door is locked, and she said, you think everybody loves you, don't you, Nick? And I said, yeah, I do. She said, they don't. I said, what are you talking about, they don't? Who doesn't love me? She said, you work it out. This is about 9 weeks into the show, from the very beginning, how I got the show. And she said, how did you get, how do you know about this script? I said, Johnny Byrne asked me to go down to his house 3 weeks ago, and he showed me the first draft of this. She said, he should not have done that, Nick, don't you understand? Look, she said, sweetheart, I love you. You know I love you. Gerry loves you. I said, does he? She said, well, yeah, in his own way he does. Because Gerry didn't love anybody. Really weird guy. She said, I can't say who or how this has happened, but I can tell you, you just have to swallow it. You're not going to have this role. Yes, Johnny should not have shown you that script, but there are powers beyond my station. I said, you're the producer of this show, Sylvia, what are you talking about? Is it Gerry? She said, no, it's not Gerry. Use your own imagination. But I swear to God, if you come out with this and go and confront this person, you're out of the show. And it's not my doing. I don't want that to happen, Nick. Just accept it. I couldn't fathom who she was talking about. I couldn't believe that this man that was so lovely to me had said he's not to play that role. But so, this is a whole 2 years later, when I'm getting in my car and trying to drive away, he's saying, don't do this. Fred Freiberger is too powerful. I want you to stay. I said, you want me to stay? He said, yes, I'm your friend. And I said, you're my friend, are you, Martin? Dragon's domain, Martin. And he goes, and he went white to the navel and said, oh, Nicky, it was too soon. I said, too soon for who? Wasn't too soon for me, Martin. And I got in my car and I drove away. And he just stood there with his hands open wide. I went home, I grabbed hold of my wife, I went down to the airport, and I got on a plane and I flew to Austria. I didn't want anybody to find me. I vanished for 2 weeks. The industry went crazy. Screen Actors Guild, not Screen Actors Guild, British Equity said, you'll never work again. I came back, I rang my agent, she said, oh God, where have you been? The place is in a turmoil. What have you done? And I said, I don't give a shit. I'm finished as far as I'm concerned because it's broken my heart and I don't want to do this anymore, so I'm out. And Gerry called me up and he said, come on down, Sylvia and I want to see you. They apologized to me and they said that they'd try and make sure that this didn't happen again, but they wanted me to stay in the show. I never confronted Martin with it ever until 2 years later when he said he was my friend. And he was my friend, you know, I mean, we're all friends. I'm sure you've all had some best friend in life and something happens and you want to punch the other person in the face and walk away, you know? And then eventually, and people say, oh, they don't talk anymore. Eventually you do, because I loved him.
Now, Barbara and him, were they a power couple on that show, or did he fully, control it? Because I thought Barbara had some say in it.
Oh, I gotta go. Barbara was always very, very quiet. She's a wonderful, what's the word, diplomat. She really is very diplomatic. She was a marvelous actress and very loyal to him, but he was a naughty boy. Too many people. So that's, and you know, I'm sorry to burst any bubbles here, but you know, most big stars are not perfect people.
Yeah.
I mean, who's perfect anyway? It's only that, you know, when you get notoriety and people can write about it, that people start discovering stuff.
They're very insecure.
How was Barry Morse?
Barry Morse was wonderful. It's like, he was like Professor Bergman. He was Professor Bergman, you know, he was a very eloquent. I went home with him once to his little apartment in London, tiny little room he had in Soho. That's all he ever wanted, you know. I mean, he had a big house in Canada actually, but he had this little bolt hole in London. Gentleman, a gentleman's gentleman. I think I got to wrap this up, right, guys? Did you tell-
One last one.
Is that coming from you, Roy?
Yeah.
The last question?
Yep, last question.
What is it? You, sir. Did you have your hand up?
Yes.
Yes.
So did you get a 44-inch eagle from 1612?
Did I get a fort? No, I don't have any memorabilia at all.
Okay.
Why did they tell you they gave
Oh
me
no,
one?
I thought they had sent you one. But
Jeez,
read
I wouldn't remember that, buddy. 44. No, I do have an eagle. It's
Okay.
only this big.
Did it survive the fire?
Yes. My house didn't burn.
Oh, your house didn't. burn.
My house is what's called still standing.
Okay.
I'm a smoker. I can't get into my house. It is, the swimming pool looks worse than this carpet. It used to be, you know. The house is toxic. I can show you photographs of all this. It's horrendous. I go there in a hazmat suit and I go around and I pick up things quietly. I'm not supposed to go there. There's huge lawsuits going on. The street that I live on I can't say the name of the address. Part of the Palisades. My street is totally untouched. There's not one house in my street that burnt down. God took a pin and he went, where does Nick Tate live? I swear to God, and I said this to my son, I'm right in the middle of that street. God said, that street's staying. My son's house was incinerated. And I told Tommy this story about how God shined his light on me. He said, well, what did God do to me, Dad?
He wanted you to move back home.
My son is a wonderful human being. And I felt like such an arsehole for saying that, you know. I said, I didn't mean that he didn't. He said, does God not love me, Dad? If he loves you that much, and you say things in life, but why did I say that, you know? I'm human. Yes, so did I answer the question?
Yes, sir.
No, I don't have a 44-inch eagle.
Everyone, Mr. Nick Tate.
I'm going to be signing autographs this afternoon, and I'm going to be talking again tomorrow. We'll try and find some other nice things to say. Don't let me go down the dark corridors, please. I know I've gone down the dark corridors today. I'm going to kick myself.
Thank you, Nick.
That's okay, Nick, we love you.
Yeah.